I thank the member for Lingiari and I call the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Close the Gap report with sadness, like many members in this House. It's a sober reading about the collective failure of the nation to address the disadvantage over generations for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. There are people who might from time to time want to use these issues as partisan point scoring. Frankly, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders deserve better. It's not a failure of one government, it's not a failure of two governments, it's not a failure of three governments. It's a failure of what happens when you break apart a culture, a tradition, connection to country and ideals, and the human consequences that then flow. There are, of course, in this report, in the Close the Gap statement, some areas and glimmers of hope, particularly around educational attainment and meeting 2 of the 7 standards, for which we're all particularly happy to see happen, including having 95% of all Indigenous 4-year-olds enrolled in early childhood education by 2025. In 2018, 86.4% of Indigenous 4-year-olds were enrolled in early childhood education, compared with 91.3% of non-Indigenous Australian children, and halving the gap for Indigenous Australians aged 20 to 24 in Year 12 attainment or equivalent attainment rates by 2020. These are, of course, signs of opportunity and of growth, because education provides a foundation for people being able to make informed decisions and go on and live happy and successful lives. It's why Liberals in the Gladstone administration in the United Kingdom many years ago established the whole principle of universal education, because at the heart of it comes the principle of equal opportunity for all people regardless of their circumstance, and continue throughout the Australian tradition here. But there has been a gap, a chasm around the realities experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And in many of the other remaining metrics around life expectancy and health and well-being, there is so much further to go. And we know that all of it isn't going to be solved overnight, not because the failure of a tick or a flick of a bureaucrat's pen, or from a lack of funding, but because often issues around health and inequality exist across generations, across cultural problems, and against a culture of responsibility that we need to foster over time. That should never be used as an excuse. We must be able to demonstrate clearly that we're heading down the right path and that we're seeing improvement. But sadly, those standards and those goals have not been met. And I want to particularly welcome the speech by the Prime Minister on the Close the Gap statement, not only because I thought it was one of the finest speeches that he has given as Prime Minister, but more critically because the focus of himself, as well as the Minister for Indigenous Affairs, the great Ken Wyatt, was not to accept the report and say, we failed yet again, let's keep trying more of the same. In fact, what they did was turned around and gave an appropriate, philosophical, practical plan to address the issues of disadvantage which has led us to the situation where we have not achieved the targets that we have set for ourselves. And I think the focus the Prime Minister has put, and the Minister for Indigenous Affairs has put, on focusing on Canberra, on community and not Canberra, is particularly welcome. Because many members for a long time have talked about, and rightly so, I might add, the failure to encourage Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to have the freedom to take responsibility. They've spoken about the lack of self-determination. In the words of the Prime Minister, we have failed the opportunity to recognise that freedom is built on empowerment and responsibility. And so focusing on community and not Canberra reflects a fundamental understanding about how the success of all of our lives is built. We are individuals, but we do not sit on islands. We come together and form family and the community as a foundation for nationhood. It's something that we take for granted every day, how to build a nation from the citizen and the individual up. And too often what we have had in the issues affecting Indigenous Australians is the exact opposite of Canberra deciding how people should live their lives, of Canberra understanding through the lens of bureaucrats and of people in this place, thinking they understand best the reality, the conditions, the circumstances, the culture, the attitudes and the traditions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And frankly, too often to displace them in favour of the worldview of people who sit in this city. So to focus on community and not Canberra, to have a yarn and to listen to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, to take us all as a nation on a collective journey is the foundation of addressing the closing the gap in the future. And I would hope that the members opposite would welcome the initiative the Prime Minister and the Minister for Indigenous Affairs has taken, because I think it provides the opportunity for not just a reset, but a sense of ownership by all of us, but most by those who would seek to gain the most from a change in policy. To empower people with our support to take a maximum opportunity and control over their own lives and that of their communities to advance the collective interest. And that's what we should want for ourselves, and that is what we should want for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders if you want to empower people not just today but for future generations as well. I said in my address and reply speech to this Parliament Deputy Speaker that one of the most important evolutions that I have seen in my lifetime, in my 39 years, has been the embracing by the whole of the Australian community of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages and culture and traditions into the culture of the nation. A powerful and ongoing symbol that we all share about our past and how we can move forward together as a nation. But we can never do that while we still continue to have citizens who are not able to realise their full ambition to live a happy and successful life. And that is as much the close the gap as we need. The journey is not over. And we share a great responsibility between all of us to make sure that we build it together, in partnership, with respect and through listening, so that we can empower people to be able to live out their full Australian dream. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you.